Welcome back to Myth Vision Podcast. Derek Lambert, Mrs. Myth Vision, Dr. James Tabor, and Neil from Gnostic Informant. How are you?
I'm great. Good to see you. You guys were on the Tabor weight loss program a few weeks ago.
I'm telling you, man.
Yeah, really.
All that walking.
Yeah, that fine print kicked in too. So
what about warning about walking? Yeah.
Well, the fine print about, the having to be sick to lose that, weight.
Oh, yeah.
So I got to that point.
So yeah, I'm excited. I'm the guest, but I want everybody listening to do some super chats because we're going to talk about the Holy Land. You can call it Palestine, Israel, Egypt. After the British Mandate period, they call it Palestine. But we're not going to do the political. We're going to do the ancient. So we're just calling it the Holy Land, stuff where the Bible either happened or didn't happen. But you call it,
at least it's drawing from this geographic location.
Yeah, you come down on a satellite view and you come down to that coast of the Mediterranean, right on the west, or the east rather, not the west. Switch my map around here. And there it is, that Holy Land where all this stuff, it's kind of like the stage or arena. And the thing about it is people who study the Bible, I did this. I got my PhD from the University of Chicago in like 81 or 2. And I didn't even go to Israel until like the 90s. And since then, I've been like 73 times. In other words, I could do everything I wanted to do in a library, right? Looking at ancient texts, manuscripts. And then I thought, if I'm studying this stuff, shouldn't I go there? Like somebody's going to specialize in Homer or Plato or something, maybe go to Athens and look around, So that's sort of what we did. But I like to call it tracking Jesus. Now, remember, tracking, you don't see him, Derek. He's invisible. You're tracking.
Right.
But was something left behind or not? Or is it not a track? You go, well, there's a track, and Neil might go, that's not a track, man. That's just a late Byzantine tradition. That's not Jesus. And of course, if he didn't exist, there aren't any tracks.
Right. And you realize how little we know when you, for example, when you get to a spot like the Garden of Gethsemane and you're like, okay, we're here. Which one is it? Well, there's 3 different candidates for where it could have been.
Yeah.
When you run into situations like that, or like the tomb, for example, here's where the Skuldova might have been, but it also might have been 2 miles that way. You're like, okay, we really don't know where this guy was.
Let me just say one thing here, because I'm just a student, right? But I really want to remain that because we can't be dogmatist. I wish I could give that to more people, meaning just this finding a philosophy in your studies of not being dogmatic. Because we don't know where it is means it never happened. I wish we really didn't do that too. I wish we went, okay, we have 3 candidates that the guy, could have been at. They say could have been a 4th that we don't even know about. The point is the text, as you were talking about, James, the text implies it happened somewhere here. Now, while people might be crawling on their hands and knees, kissing the ground in a spot, thinking this is where the guy stood or whatever, it's really the reality of this is where the text says these things happen, or at least in this vicinity in Jerusalem, right? They go outside the city gates. Well, there's city gates, and we have an idea of where Jerusalem was. So,
yeah, you have to keep in mind for all of these proposals, this is part of tracking, really, if you want to use that metaphor. We have information. Like we know when these various sites were proposed and who proposed them and whether they're late or whether they're early and so forth. And on this tour, as you know, it's a historical archaeological tour. It's not theological.
mm-hmm.
We discuss all of that. Like what sort of evidence do we have for all of these things beyond the text? It's like going beyond the text, on the ground, under the ground, looking at the geography. And if you haven't done that, it's really hard to imagine, even if you are reading the text as more historical than mythological, what was really going on. It's just you guys. I wanted to ask you right off. None of you three had ever been to the Holy Land, and what was your most insightful, one or two or whatever? Here we go.
It's exactly.
That's it.
Perfect.
That's worth $5.
Perfect super chat. Yeah.
I think we should let Ryan go first.
But I'm going to push Yaakov a little bit and say, in terms of tracking Jesus, because you might have liked the ice cream at a certain stand or something, but because I want to push you on the subject. So, but you can say what you want. What was the most, like, that was my question. What really struck you? Like, oh, wow. Yeah. Now I get this, or I got this new insight. Do you have anything in mind, or either?
Neil, did you want me to go first?
It's up to you. I can jump on.
Because I think Neil and me, in the weirdest way, are almost identical twins in our thinking about this. And tell me if I'm wrong. If I'm a palm reader, I should start getting paid for this. For me, it was when we were in Sepphoris. Now, don't get me wrong. Okay, we're all over the place. I'm blown away by maritime Caesarea. I'm like all of these places are blowing me away. It's really cool to learn. But when we were in Sepphoris, and I'm seeing a centaur, and I'm seeing Dionysus on the floors in typical homes in the city where these are Jews.
The theater.
And then I'm going into the house, the mansion on the top of the hill, above the theater, the mosaics and the Jewish/pagan world that they lived in. What it did for me is we keep dichotomizing, acting like, like there's this pure, clear, black, thick line between the pagan world and Jewish. And we go, oh, yeah. Well, this is, doesn't mean we can't figure out people are Jewish or not Jewish. My point is like, I didn't realize how much in ordinary, everyday people's homes and lives, and even people who were rich in the top of the hill, the whole nine, had been accommodating to the world of the Mediterranean pagan world, if that makes sense. And it blew my mind that it was that close to Nazareth, which makes me kind of wonder, what's going on.
Let me just add to that, because most people have never even heard of Sepphoris, much less can spell it. But I would agree with you. I think for my students, it's that way too. And I've excavated there several seasons, and I showed you where we dug. But the other thing you got to do, though, is look at the centuries, because Sepphoris starts with the Hashmoneans. That's 100 years before Jesus, goes all the way through the time of Jesus, all the way into the 2nd and 3rd century. And those synagogue mosaics and some of the other, like the dining hall you're talking about that had the Dionysus celebration, that's later than the time of Jesus. But the point is, you put it all together as a broad context, because it is a Jewish city. And just like you said, Nazareth, it's a little village, but it's outside the largest urban center of the Galilee. It was Herod Antipas's capital. And so when Jesus says things like, a city set on a hill cannot be hid, if you're out on the plains of Kansas, you've never seen a city set on a hill. Maybe got the wrong state. I'm going to offend somebody from Kansas and say, oh, we got hills in Kansas, but you know what I'm saying. The flat plain. But when you're at Nazareth, just look out your door and you're going to see this gleaming city of Nazareth, of Sepphoris, which is the urban capital. It would have been lit up at night. So yeah, I thought that was amazing. You guys both got so much off on the synagogue art with zodiacs and, the constellations and the sun god basically riding his chariot right there in the synagogue floor. Yeah.
I mean, it changes the game when we talk about, this idea that they're Jewish nationalists and they just are we abhor anything Hellenistic. It's like,
and I don't want to project that back to the 1st century, because during the time of Herod the Great, which leads up to the life of Jesus in the 1st century, there was you're going to interview Jonathan Adler, I think, and he will make this point, or maybe you already did, but his book is really out there now and people are reading it like crazy. There's a strict period in which Jesus lives, and the pagan stuff is on the fringe. Remember, we went all the way to Caesarea Philippi on the coast. We go all the way over to Caesarea Maritime on the coast, and you get temples to Augustus in the time of Jesus.
Right.
But what you're talking about was probably 3rd century, but it's still Jews are just fine with Hellenistic culture. So it's almost like the strict religious guys are like the police, like, no, you can't do that. Don't put any art on your coins, with animal figures or humans. But then what do they have in the temple? The Tyrrhenian shekel from Tyre. It's like pagan right in the temple.
Yeah, and like Josephus highlights how Pontius Pilate, just for bringing in aqueducts and having standards that have eagles on them, people revolted for that. So in the 1st century, there definitely was that.
It's kind of like Mecca. Like if you go to Mecca today, there's Mecca police, just like there were temple police. And, people could get very offended at something you might do. And it's kind of that way today. Like Ryan noticed how the women are separate from the men, because the men have to concentrate when they pray. This is Judaism as a whole. It's actually most, I think, forms of Islam as well. It's kind of Middle Eastern. But that's like, there's literally like, I'd call them like Western Wall police, meaning guys walking around in black hats and suits. And so if your wife had walked up with you, they were, no, don't go there. Well, I think in the 1st century, it was similar rules because they also separated men and women. But so there it's tight, like you're in Jerusalem at the temple. But then as you just walk out of the city, you're going into the hinterland, you're going to have more freedom. So what was your surprising thing, Neil? Same thing or?
Yeah, being in the north, seeing how Hellenized it was, and but not only that, going down to Jerusalem and getting a dose of how serious it is for burial. You had the Muslim side, and all the Muslims are buried in that one section. You had the Jewish side, all the Jews are buried in that one, and they're all facing the temple. So they're all waiting for all 3 of these major religions are all waiting for the same thing. That was crazy.
That valley of Kidron, I call it the 50-yard line of the apocalypse.
Yeah.
It's like you want to be buried there because whether it's Jesus coming or, the 13th Amman or the Jewish Messiah that the rabbis would be waiting for, he's supposedly going to show up right there. So he's going to raise the dead and all these traditions. So it is pretty amazing. When you went to the top of the Mount of Olives and just looked out for the first time, and you're looking west over the whole city, did that kind of take your breath away?
Sure.
I mean, it seems like you can almost touch the city,
Well, I'm just, as being a fan of history, any location like that has so much history that's, it has such an impression on the world is going to have that effect. And I definitely experienced that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I tried to imagine, since the temple is gone completely, I try to imagine what it would have been like, if I was standing there and it was still standing on top of the mount. One thing that I think I can't emphasize enough, and no matter what I say on the show, you can't really give people. You can read it in a textbook, and that's at least going halfway. I didn't even know I didn't know the geography, like getting there on the ground, and it brings a whole nother dimension to your study of trying to understand what people are saying when they say it. Even if you don't think something literally happened, then why are they using this location? Why is this
setting?
Right.
Do you remember that model? We did it the last day and we were kind of rushed, but the model of Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Yes.
See there, and we'll take people there if they go with me on this tour in March. You see, it's like an acre or more of a model. So the temple's like this high. It's like a meter or 2 high, but it's all shrunk down to a model. So then we're like giants walking around the model. seeing all the stuff we just seen as it is today, that kind of brings it home, don't you think? Because
Sure.
it's like when we first walked up to that model, we were on the Mount of Olives looking at the city, but as it was in the time of Herod the Great. So I love that model. I just think it's amazing.
Yeah, it was.
And
I
that's
want to ask Ryan, not on the Jesus stuff, because you're not a nerd like we are, honey. But what was some of the exciting things, and then we'll continue. But what would you say, even just one, so you don't have to overthink it?
Exciting or surprising?
What was your favorite part?
anything, yeah.
Well, my favorite part, obviously, is the Dead Sea. I mean, you already knew I was going to say that.
We
I mean,
got
that's
back
like
with
nothing
salt.
you can ever like experience, you know. And so for me, I'm afraid of sharks or
Fish.
anything in the water. So to be able to just go in the water and not worry about any live creatures is awesome.
That's amazing. I've never heard somebody point that out, but that is amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. My
So
wife
someone
doesn't
who's
like,
like
yeah,
weird
she
like
doesn't
me,
like
you
that
know?
either, where you feel something creepy on your legs kind of biting you and you're like, what? So,
Right? Yeah, that
it's
was
also the
my
lowest spot on earth.
Yeah.
You know, Josephus tells this weird story, the Jewish historian of the period, that the Emperor Vespasian goes down to the Dead Sea. He's going to be the emperor. He's not emperor yet. And he throws a couple of Jewish captives into the water and ties their hands and feet, because he goes, I hear you can float in this thing without even paddling. And he just throws them in and they just pop up like corks.
Wow.
And he goes, I guess it's true. So we didn't do that. We don't throw people in, but
That was
Like-
a shocker, wasn't
like
it?
Neil says, we
Has anyone seen that video?
Yeah.
I'm wondering if people
oh,
on
did he
YouTube have
post it
seen
already?
You can play it if you want.
I mean, I won't waste the
It's
time because
funny,
we're restricted. I also I was thinking, what about the baptism in Jordan where we had there's so many things like
Yeah.
we did that was so much fun. I hope people, so just so that people know, if they are like, wow, this sounds like a fun experience, and it really is. I can't tell you the food even. I mean, I'm a weirdo, man. I gotta eat. If I'm not eating, I'm not happy. And I wake up every morning. It's unbelievable.
The
And
falafel.
it's,
Never get sick of falafel, that's for sure.
no, and it's kosher. It's super healthy.
Yeah.
And me and my wife are actually now from that trip going and being determined to hit the gym every morning to try and get back into shape, because it just helped us kind of set our mindset and say, hey,
Me too.
we're not getting any younger, if that
yeah,
makes
we've
any
been doing
sense.
the eggs and the
Yeah, I cook
Yeah,
breakfast every morning
those
instead of eating out.
breakfasts. Yeah, those breakfasts at those hotels, it's just it's almost obscene. I mean, nobody could eat it all, but it's like, do you want salad? Do you want fruit? Do you want vegetables? You want eggs? What do you want? It's just all there.
Yeah.
So.
Hmm.
So, yeah, there's so much about it. But like in my case, like I said, for years, I got my PhD. I read texts. I read, even the Dead Sea Scrolls, but I'd never seen them or been there. And it really transformed me to be able to do that. And the tour is almost full, by the way. People really want to go. I don't want to take more than 30, because remember on the bus, we had a little room. Some of these tours, they put like 48 people on a bus. And, you're just sitting like this the whole time. And you can't, you have like 2 feet. But we have a little room on the bus if somebody wants to go to the back or move around and take pictures. And so I think I checked this morning, we have 25 signed up. So we could take about probably 6 more. So if anybody listening wants to do it, you're going to put up the information, and
It's already in the description, and the link is there too. If
Yeah,
they
they
want
can.
You're going in March, and I just want to
March
go check it out.
17th through 28th, and we stay at good hotels. They're 4-star hotels, which is just like a 5-star. I mean, they're nice, but I love staying in the desert. We stay in the desert for 3 nights. And it's not camping out. It's not luxury glamping either, but it's certainly adequate. And I personally like that. And that's when we go to Masada and Qumran and all of those things, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. What I was going to do as your guest here, is talk about methodology. You filmed together, three of you. Ryan was filming like crazy all the time too. You filmed hundreds and hundreds of hours, wouldn't you say, collectively?
Easy.
I don't
It would
know,
have to be.
hundreds and hundreds
Oh,
of
between
hours.
the three of us.
Well,
Between the
with
three,
all three of you going at once,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, yeah.
several hundred hours. It's got to be edited, but I mean, you're filming all the time. Even on the bus, I'm talking, and you're like, Dr. Tabor, wait, look this way, you know. So
Yeah. Well,
Well, yeah,
a lot of the
so-
juicy stuff was on the bus. That's
I
why
had
I was
3 cards that had 300 hours on them. They're all full. That's just me.
okay. So
Oh,
I'm going
yeah,
to go
yeah.
with hundreds of hours. I'm going to
Yeah.
go with hundreds and hundreds of hours. So
Yeah.
it's got to be edited. But
Yeah.
the thing I'm interested in, I would call method. People say methodology. I don't say that. I'm trying to be correct with my students. I say method, not methodology. Methodology is the study of method. My method, my way of going about something is to just ask, what might we know and how do we know it? And by know, I would grade it on a scale of 1, 2, and 3. Some things I would just say that's just not likely. Like Jesus, what if somebody said Jesus was probably crucified, if he was crucified, in Caesarea Philippi? You know, and I mean, that's a silly example, but and then I would say, well, what sort of textual or other evidence would you have, even that the Romans crucified there, or that he was there, and nobody suggested that. I'm just trying to say people do say pretty crazy things.
Mm-hmm.
And lots of things have no evidence whatsoever. And then that would sort of be the lowest tier. And then as you move up in probability, you could have something that seems likely, but you don't know for sure much about it, and you can't be sure. For example, you already mentioned Sepphoris. If he grew up in Nazareth and we've tracked him there, and that's Nazareth in the Galilee where we went, and Sepphoris is the urban capital, and he's a stonemason, or it's called a tecton. He's a builder. And Herod Antipas is building his capital during the years he's growing up, when he and his brothers and so forth are in the building trades. Now, I give this a 2, not a 3. Is it possible, likely? I mean, anything's possible, I guess you could say, but is it likely that you got a building boom going on just 3 miles north of where you live, and you're a builder, and you do stonemason work, that you would like be involved, probably go to Sepphoris? Well, Derek, that would then expose him to this Hellenistic culture that we usually don't recognize. Now, then you go, well, is there anything beyond that? Remember when we were at the theater, I asked you, what does the word hypocrite mean? Which is used all the time in the gospel. Hypokrites. It's a Greek word. It's not in English. I mean, we say it in English, but it's actually a Greek word. You know what it means? It means somebody that acts on the stage. So here he is talking to people in the Galilee. Goes, you guys are stage actors. It implies people like know what a stage is. And we saw several theaters, right? We saw Beit Shean, we saw Caesarea on the Mediterranean, and we saw Sepphoris even has a theater. And it's just Hellenistic culture, you know, good Roman Hellenistic culture. You got to have a theater. Did he go to the theater? I can't say that. Maybe he built one of the seats. But again, we're trying to give him some sort of urban context rather than this pious idea that he's just like out on the hills, you know, herding some sheep or something all day long. When they're this urban Roman center of culture and commerce, with major roads going north, south, east, and west coming in. So it helps to be there on the ground. And then some things I think we can say with great likelihood. And I had one of them, and we can talk about it. And I want people to ask questions if they will. But if you would put up that Ecce Homo, it's the website.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
just so you know, we got plenty of super chats already. So whenever
Good.
we're ready to take super
This
chats and
one
questions.
kind of blows my mind. If you guys remember Derek, before the trip, because I had mentioned this to him in a couple of interviews, he kept mentioning over and over. He goes, yeah, Pilate's judgment seat, Pilate's judgment seat. So I don't know how your Latin is, but there's a famous phrase in the Gospels where Pontius Pilate, the procurator he's sometimes called, or the legate of Judea, the governor, let's just call him, of Judea, he brings Jesus out and he says, Ecce homo, behold the man. And the question is, where did that happen? And here you have a map, and you see that little white area there. That's Herod's palace. Now today, it hasn't been excavated much. It's just the modern city. But outside where that red square is, that little dot.
Yep.
Go ahead on down the blog post. This is a blog post anybody can go to. It's on my blog, jamestabor.com. Okay, keep on going. That's the model I was talking about. And notice it just has a wall right in front there. That's the reconstruction of the palace. But what we now know by archaeology, go to the next picture. Look, that is that wall as it is today. And you guys went up those steps. I call it the stairway to nothing because it runs into a wall. See that? And those are Herodian steps going up into Herod's palace. No doubt.
Oh, we have footage of this, by the way.
This is a 3. This is a 3. This isn't like, this is Pilate's. This is the seat of Roman government in Judea. You see those two kind of, what would you call those, as you go up the steps, corridors, stone corridors on each side? That would have been built up. That's been dated to the Herodian period, 1st century CE. And then it just goes up into the wall. The reason is that wall is much later. That's the Turkish wall from Suleiman, which would be in the 1500s, you understand?
Mm.
But as you go up onto it, if you go up the steps and turn to the left and walk on up, go to the next picture.
Oh, hold on. Lost it for a second.
Scroll on down. There's how it would have looked in the 1st century. Now, can you put those two together? It had a gate. There was a steps going up and a gate. And then you would walk up the next steps to the platform, and that's called the Praetorium, or the seat of government. Every Roman province has to have an official seat of government. It's where the governor can make pronouncements, and they're officially Roman law. So this is not the traditional site where all the tourists go. They're taken to what's left of what's called the Fortress Antonio. If you go back to the map real quick, I'll show you where that is. I don't think you can't see my pointer, but if you look at the Temple Mount, Derek, can you point? Mm-hmm. Go north of the Temple Mount, that little red square thing there. Yeah, that's where everybody goes on the Via Dolorosa. And they go, oh, Pilate was there. Hey, look, the governor of Judea is not going to stay in the barracks. That's soldiers in the barracks guarding the temple. He's going to be at Herod's palace. Okay, so go back to the reconstruction, because it really gets interesting. Go back to the reconstruction. Keep going. Right there, the picture. Yeah. Okay. I don't know if you can make that a little bigger. I think people can see it. That's okay. Don't worry about it.
I can pop it in.
So notice you got this little teeny figure up at the top. That's Jesus. I had an artist. I paid for this drawing to be made. I paid like $1,000 for this artist to do it. I wanted to show people in my book, The Jesus Dynasty. Now, if you'll put up, there you go. Great. That is wonderful. So when we go places and you see that bedrock coming down from that tower on the left, kind of in the middle, that's there today. You can go put your hand on that bedrock. You can touch those steps. Those are real. It's just the gate that's gone, but you can go up on the top where you see the canopy. That's called the Bema. And the Bema is the judgment seat of Pontius Pilate. So when I took you guys there, I said to you, I would give this a 3 with a couple of stars, meaning if Jesus was tried before Pontius Pilate in the early morning hours of Passover, he was on that pavement. Now, put up John 18, and I want to show you something, because I took all the theology out. I love taking the theology out of John. John is the most Christological enhanced text. But if you strip it down just to his geography and his history, whoever's behind this gospel knows the city, I'm telling you. So I'm not going to read all this but just notice, we'll start in verse 1. When Jesus had spoken these words, he went forth with his disciples over the brook Kidron, where there was a garden into which he entered and his disciples. Now Judas also, who betrayed him, knew the place, for Jesus oftentimes resorted there with his disciples. So that's the idea. Like Kidron is not even named in Mark. But John says, no, so what did I do? We walked down the Mount of Olives. I took you into the Kidron and up to the city. We literally like walked on those very spots. Right. And in the rest of the text, we might even put it up there again. Notice, I think I underlined it, but I don't know if the underlines are showing. It looks like because it's a black screen, they're not showing. But what you can look it up in John 18. What happens if you go on down to verse 28 there, put that at the top. Right there. And they led Jesus from Caiaphas into the Praetorium, and it was early, and they themselves entered not into the Praetorium that they might not be defiled and eat the Passover. And then you keep reading, and Pilate goes in and out, in and out, in and out. I think like 6 times. You can read it yourself. And finally, he delivers him over. Now go back to the crowd is down below, and they're not coming up into the area that would be considered defiling by Roman presence, because they've already gone to the mikvah, which is the ceremonial pools and so forth. So for me, this just gives you like a context. It's one of the examples of many, many things we saw. Now, that was only excavated in 1970 by my colleague Shimon Gibson that I work with. And all of these stones can be dated exactly. Those steps and the corridor going up and what's called Gabbatha, the pavement. So right at the top. So I just thought that would be a good example of what we mean by tracking. So when someone from the Crusader period goes, oh, I think Jesus was probably tried up north here, and you've got the whole tradition of the Via Dolorosa. I mean, I'm not going to stop crowds on Easter and say, hey, you guys, you're at the wrong place. It's over here on the west side of the city. But
right.
I mean, I'm absolutely certain that it was. Now, you could say, well, Jesus didn't exist. Well, that doesn't matter with what we're talking about. If the Romans have a formal trial by the governor of Judea, who comes from Caesarea on the coast during Passover, because there could be unrest, and he sets up the seat of Roman government there for that Passover week, that's where anybody's going to get tried that's tried or arrested. They're going to be taken to the Praetorium, and there's actually kind of a prison there where they keep people. And,
yeah, that makes sense.
So that's just an example of where was Jesus crucified. You mentioned that earlier. Well, there's a 4th century site that Constantine's mother found by asking a Jewish guy around 330. Where was Jesus crucified? She asked a Jewish guy, and he goes over there. And I think he actually directed them to John Hyrcanus's tomb. But anyway, that's the tomb that everybody goes to, millions of Christians. And then there's the Protestant Golgotha. And then I personally think it was on the Mount of Olives, and I'm going by Josephus there. So, but to be there and see all these things, that's the key. We can talk about them here. After a while, your mind just glazes over with all these terms like, what did he say? Via Dolorosa, Praetorium, Sepphoris, this, that. But when you're there, you also get a guidebook. It's like a 50-page guidebook with pictures, maps.
If you don't read it, You
If
will
you don't read
find
it,
out
you're just
soon.
saying like stupid things all the time.
James literally will tell you the entire trip. And if you read the guidebook, you'd know this. And of course, who
Jared
didn't read it? Well, I did when we were on finally during the trip. I had to break away with all of the hectic stuff we were doing and read it. And I'm like, all right, I know where we're going.
Did you guys like the Sea of Galilee? Did you
Oh, yeah.
find it was bigger, smaller than you thought? What did you think, Ryan? Did you imagine it like huge or just about like it was? It's like a lake, basically. Yeah.
I didn't really know what to expect. You know, I didn't have any expectations. I also
Remember
loved
how they're always
Yeah.
they're always seeing Jesus and his entourage, I call it, in a boat. And then, you know, they're going like from Capernaum to Bethsaida. And when you're right there, you can go like, oh yeah, they were here. Look, they're over there now. And then they're like running around. So if you read particularly Mark and John, and just take out the red letter stuff in John, because that's like, I mean, I'm talking about for history. That's Jesus talking like pages and pages of, you know, his teachings. You know, I am the vine, you are the branches, and that kind of thing, you know, or in my Father's house are many mansions. These have nothing to do with what we're doing on the tour. But if you go like, he walked down the Kidron and there was a garden there and nobody knew where it was. It's like a Jesus hideout, right? Only John tells you that. A Jesus hideout on the Mount of Olives. Now, the traditional spot can't be it. Remember, Derek? It's right on the road. Like all you'd have to do is walk up and go, there he is. He's right there. Get him. It's probably up further up, hidden around some trees or whatever. But we walk down, you kind of get to see the lay of the land. So I think it really, it just, if you go now, and I know you've been really busy getting back, but I would encourage both of you, I have my students do this all the time. Just sit down and read the Gospel of Mark, because he's the earliest, especially about, and it's mostly the Galilee. You won't believe how it'll just jump out, you know, like, and he sailed into Gennesaret, and you go, oh yeah, that's where we caught the boat. You know, when we went out on the, you'll see all of these references to the stuff you've read all your life. Or he sat down in a synagogue, and here we are at Magdala, and there's two synagogues from the first century. So, you know, and so I don't want anybody to think that what I do is apologetics. It's rather exposing you to the texts and what their background might be. Just like if we were doing Apollonius of Tyana, okay? Philostratus, and we were going to study that. And we went to the places that are mentioned, mostly Asia Minor. It would throw light on how that story is told. That's what we're doing. And then people evaluate it in their own way. But I wouldn't neglect John, especially those last chapters, 18, 19, 20 of John. Whoever wrote that is very familiar with, you know, with the lay of the land, I like to call it. Very familiar with it. So
makes sense.
That's awesome. I've got a bunch of super chats. Are we taking these?
Let's do them. Yeah.
Okay. Before we do, go in the description. If you want to go on tour, I didn't know what to expect, and it was absolutely an experience and a time of my life where I thought it was amazing. So if you're interested, it is down in the description, and there's not too many slots left. I also just want to make one plug. We are working on editing the Mark course that James Tabor did with me in Charlotte, and Neil, of course, me. You know, we're all going to launch this stuff. So if you're interested in taking that course, we will have that at some point. Hopefully, I don't want to put times, but I'm thinking January, February, it should be launched.
Sure.
And I'm saying that should be enough time for us to get it done. But we are fickle humans, and we are not infallible here. So Scott Rutherford, thank you for the super chat. Scott said, did you know that Tovia Singer is being sued for $100,000 and is fundraising to help with this? I did not know it, but
it's a really, I don't want to get into it at all, except I know it, and it's the Prime Minister of Israel's wife is suing him because he questioned whether she might be a kind of secret messianic believer, which means like thinks Jesus is the Messiah.
Right.
And it's just this tempest in a teapot. That's, if you want to follow it, if you can go to the Jerusalem Post or the Times of Israel, Tovia's had articles in it and so forth. It just happened like 3 days ago. It's
Oh my
like
gosh.
crazy stuff.
I did not know
But
that. And
I hope
honestly,
they can somehow solve it peacefully. But you
Sure.
know, it's like he said, she said. But I'm not gonna take any side because I just read it yesterday. You know,
yeah.
but
Yeah.
Tovia's putting up a pretty good account of what he actually said and what he didn't say, and he's
Yeah.
claiming to be falsely represented. So that's certainly,
Wow.
you know, from what I read of his article, he definitely has something to say that should be
Sure.
listened to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tobias, my friend. So
Thanks, Scott. Appreciate that support. Doc Ploromanot, what's up with the mysterious, lofty city of foreigners in Isaiah 24 through 27? Certainly no consensus, and the most popular approach is to disavow historical interpretation. Perhaps Ramat Rahel? Is that Rahel?
Yeah, that's, yeah. Ramat Rahel is just south of Jerusalem. It's Rachel is Rachel, and it's actually pretty near the Talpiot tombs. Now, when you go back to Isaiah 24 through 27, a lot of your viewers might not know what that is. That is Isaiah's little apocalypse, it's called. You should definitely read it. It's quite a read.
Yeah.
And there's no question that Jesus and Paul are both well aware of that text. And even though it's embedded in Isaiah, which would be the 8th century BC, it wasn't really fulfilled because, you know what, it's apocalyptic. It's about the end of the age, the judgment, the resurrection of the dead, throwing the Satan's powers. It doesn't use the word Satan, but the idea of the kings of the earth that are evil will be thrown into a bottomless pit. It's a lot of it's sort of like the book of Revelation, the book of Daniel, but impressed in Isaiah. And Doc always finds these things. It's like the little phrase, city of foreigners, like, well, if it's about Jerusalem, what's the city of foreigners? But I actually don't know the argument for Ramat Rachel. Today, it's a suburb. Our bus went through it, by the way, on the way to the Talpiot tombs. But I will say this, once you get outside of the holy perimeters of the city, you know, because that's kind of, again, my analogy of Mecca. But as you go out just a little bit, even in Jerusalem, out to the, say, south of Jerusalem, even 1 to 2 miles south, you're going to begin to get more mixture of culture because it's not right at the center of where the temple is. You follow?
Yeah.
So it could well be that he's seen something about the excavations there that show much more commerce, or maybe they allowed foreigners. But I mean, it's a great question. But I particularly like that he brought up Isaiah 24 through 27. You know how it begins? The Lord will utterly waste the earth. You know, it's like, it's just this long thing. And it says, as with the priests, so with the people, as with the rich, so with the poor, and so forth. It sounds very much like some of Paul's stuff when he's talking about don't buy and sell because the apocalypse is near and you won't be able to start a business or get married or do any commerce. It sounds very much like that.
Right.
It's also hints at resurrection of the dead. Talks about those who are in the dust waking up. So,
yeah.
Thank you, Doc. Bradford Baldwin, good to see you here, my friend. Doc, I'll be working in Amman for a week, or Amman. I don't have a lot of time, but what is the best place to see, in your opinion? I've done the Roman Theater, Petra, and Dead Sea previously.
Oh boy, if you've done that's what everybody wants, Petra. I would go up to Jerash if you don't have much time. That's north, and that's this unbelievable, it's one of the decapolis cities. Here's something, Derek, that would relate what Bradford's asking and what you said earlier. you were amazed at some of the Hellenistic Roman architecture and art and mosaics and so forth, even from the first century, like in Caesarea Philippi. There's a temple to Augustus, the emperor, right on the coast of Palestine there, right? And Pontius Pilate lives there, and he stays there, and he's going back and forth, and he's like going into the temple of Augustus, and yet he's king of Herod the Great actually built that temple. So you've heard of the Decapolis? It's 10 cities. We went to one of them. We went to Beit Shean, which is called Sepphoris in the New Testament. But if you look it up in the New Testament, Jesus is hanging out in the Decapolis cities all the time. So there's a place called Jerash to the north, Brad. And if you look at it, you could just get a tour up there. You could spend all day there. It's this fabulous. It rivals Ephesus. You know, in Asia, you might have heard of Ephesus. You can see the temples, the ruins of the temples. You can see all the columns of the main streets. It's really, really fabulous. You guys remember Beit Shean? We went at closing time, but we had plenty of time. It's like more elaborate than Beit Shean where we were. But imagine, you know, we always think of, well, Jordan is Jordan, and Jesus was in the Galilee and around Judea and Jerusalem. Well, read again the text. He goes into all the cities of the Decapolis. We got this guy traveling all over Jordan. So, you know, Holy Land is Holy Land. It's not just these little Christian tourist sites that everybody goes to on the church tours. So I would go to Jerash. I think you'd love it. It's really fabulous. Madaba is great also. There's nothing there but tourism, but there's a church that has the oldest map of the Holy Land in Madaba. It's a great place to stay. You could go to Wadi Rum in the south. If you're only there a week, though, just hop on up to Jerash. You'll love it. You could, lots of restaurants. You can eat lunch there. Really enjoy a fabulous day.
I don't know who this guy is.
Well, he needs
just stopped in.
We need him to ask a question because he's the Jordan tour guy. So you need to. I think his tour filled up like in one day, but he's doing a tour of Jordan, Israel, and Egypt next November. So you need to go to rossknichols.com and check that out. Go to his Facebook page. This is the author of the Moses Scroll, Ross Nichols. And I'm glad he's listening. Yeah. So
absolutely.
Yeah, Ross and I did. We did this tour that I'm talking about for 12 years together. We've done 12 tours together. He tends to do the Hebrew Bible part and I do the Jesus part. But as he began to get more into Jordan and Egypt and the other side of the Jordan, we realized that we can't do it all. And so it's sort of like we're splitting. I'm going to tend to do most of the New Testament Jesus stuff because that's my field. He's more interested in the Hebrew Bible and particularly like the Shapira Scroll, the Dead Sea Scrolls. I mean, I'm interested in all of it too, but it's not my expertise. So, hey, Ross, good to see you.
Thank you, Ross. Doc Plurimonat again. If Josephus's history is laden with his own ideologies, is there any reason to assume that his geography is not, particularly his apologetics spatial concept of Galilee or the destruction of Sepphoris?
Yeah, my sense of it in reading, since I've been to those places so many times and even dug at Sepphoris and stayed there, month at a time, my sense is that the geography is pretty accurate. Like sometimes he'll tell how many stadia or furlongs something is from something else. He tends to be pretty good on that. Where he will really exaggerate his numbers of battles and things like that. And that's common with all ancient texts. Like he'll go like, and 50,000 people were killed in the battle at Magdala. And the whole Lake of Galilee turned red with blood. And you'd be like, 50,000? Wow, they must have had a corpse problem for like the next few months with So, but in terms of the spatial concept, I don't think so. And Sepphoris, I mean, Sepphoris has been excavated, only probably about 10% of it. But in the area where I excavated it, it was definitely first century levels, we see evidence of destruction. And so, and then there's an earthquake in 363 CE or AD that takes everything down again. So we actually got rubble on top of rubble plus rebuilding. But generally, yeah, he's full of his ideologies, all right. But I think his geography is not bad, really. That's my sense of it, Doc.
Thank you, Doc. William Arn says, is it easier to find evidence of biblical events and locations, battles, holy sites, than any remains of persons and tribes named in the Bible?
Yeah, Bar Magazine, I would say yes and no. Like Caesarea Philippi is mentioned, Caesarea Maritima, we can find these places. Jerusalem, obviously, we can find that. All of the cities that are mentioned, there's a couple of disputes, but like Cana and Galilee, there's 2 sites, but one is medieval. The other is definitely first century, and it's been excavated. So usually the sites, locations, certainly the battles can generally be, located. Lots of times the descriptions are right on, where you can see this. If you get Steve Notley's book, Commentary on the Jewish War, with all the pictures and maps. Do you guys have that? It's beautiful. It's Josephus.
Oh, is it the one you
Jewish
gave
War.
us? You gave me it, I think.
I can't remember what I gave you now.
You gave me one loaded with maps and images and stuff.
Might have been that. I don't remember now. Yeah, because you came to my office and I had like extra copy maybe.
Yep.
Anyway, it's Steve Notley, Josephus Jewish Wars, and it's fabulous. And he will chart all the wars and the Jewish Roman revolts, and then he will have maps and red lines showing, these troops moved here and these troops moved there and so forth. Hey,
My mama.
Hello.
hello. Good to see you. Thank you for letting these 2 kids safely go to the Holy Land with us. That was really great.
I'm so glad that they were blessed and fortunate to do all of that.
And I hope you can go, because Derek's going to do some stuff more and more, I think, over there. So maybe you can go with them. Yeah.
Yes, he is awesome.
Just ask me, right? You are too for raising him.
Just ask me.
She's not biased at all. I promise.
No.
Promise.
I'm glad you looked in on us. Yeah. Now, yeah, thank you. It's good to see you. Good to meet you. Yeah, I'm going to come up and visit you guys, so I'll definitely hang out with you. As far as persons and tribes, tombs are the key with persons. We have 600 ossuaries that are inscribed from Jerusalem from the first century. 600 that are inscribed. We have 3,000, some of which aren't inscribed, but they have other kinds of indication. And so we can actually come up with what we call a prosopography. We can identify some people. For example, this will blow your mind if you don't know this. Do you remember in Mark, what's the name of the guy that the Roman soldiers impress to carry Jesus's cross?
Simon of Cyrene.
Look at you, Bible fundamentalist. And it's only in Mark. It's mentioned in Mark. But Mark then says, and he's the father of Alexander and Rufus. And Richard Balcom makes the point, before you dismiss these texts, you might not believe the theology, right? You might not believe Jesus was raised from the dead. You might not believe he walked on the sea. But was there a guy named Simon of Cyrene with a son named Alexander and a son named Rufus? His tomb's been found. And yes, it says Simon from Cyrene, and it's authentic and it's first century. And it's actually the ossuary of his son, Alexander. Now, where is it? It's in Hebrew University in the archaeological lab under a table in the back of the room. It's not on display. Nobody's trying to hide it. I think so much has been found. Now, Caiaphas, we read John 18. They take him to Caiaphas, who's the son-in-law rather, of Annas. You saw his ossuary, Derek. You filmed it. You guys filmed it. It's beautiful because he's the high priest. His tomb has been found. So tombs are the key.
Even his ossuary has like little, like, you know, it's beautiful, and
it's absolutely
carved.
Gorgeous. Yeah. And I cover that. And my main book on archaeology is called The Jesus Discovery, and it's available. You know, it's Simon & Schuster, and it's everything about the tombs. We found all kinds of stuff. I was part of, fortunately, just by luck, the only burial shroud ever found in Jerusalem intact and preserved. We call it the Tomb of the Shroud. And we've done DNA on the people in the tomb, and we begin to relate them. And then we have all the literary texts with all the names of people. So you can correlate the literary text with the inscriptions. Like we have an inscription of Pontius Pilate at Caesarea. You saw that too, the replica as well as the real thing at the Israel Museum. So there's an inscription of Pontius Pilate. Mark mentions Pontius Pilate. John mentions Pontius Pilate. Josephus mentions him. See how we're triangulating our evidence here? Mm-hmm. And then we can begin to talk about, oh yeah, he was like the prefect of Judea from 26 to 36 CE. And during his rulership, this guy, Jesus of Nazareth, is reported to have been crucified. So you begin to do stuff like that. Bar magazine, I really highly recommend. The Biblical Archaeology Society, BAS. I think it's BAS. If you just type it into Google, you'll get it, or any search engine. They have had several articles taking names in the Hebrew Bible and names in the New Testament that have external verification. Now, the big question is there any evidence of somebody from the Jesus movement? Well, I just told you one, Simon of Cyrene, his ossuary. And I have pictures of it in my book, by the way, The Jesus Discovery. You can read about it with articles and on my blog. Jesus, maybe if you accept the Talpiot tomb and the James ossuary as coming from that tomb, we might have the ossuary of Jesus of Nazareth. You know, because we do have a Jesus, son of Joseph, and a James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus. These are disputed by both evangelicals and lots of scholars who think it's too good to be true. But you kind of have to realize it's a small city, and all of the surrounding areas have been excavated and built upon with condos and apartments and so forth. And you saw how congested Jerusalem is. So it's not surprising that you could come across Caiaphas's tomb. You know who's found the most in terms of first century remains? It's not a person, it's a thing. Bulldozers. They're building a road. All of a sudden it opens up a tomb. You're building a condo. You have to clear the area. Opens up another tomb. So there's a lot to study, believe me, in terms of the material evidence.
Thank you so much for that. Doc Pleuromonot. No, listen, everybody. You get James rolling, and it's over. James knows some things. So, Doc Pleuromonot, thank you again. Explain do you need to go? The kids? Yeah. Okay, go ahead. You want to say bye to everybody real quick then?
Yeah.
So you got to go do stuff. They got birthday parties and all kinds of things going on.
Yeah, sorry.
And my mom doesn't even know, but we're surprising her as well. So
I hope I didn't.
Don't worry. We got time real quick, but she's got to prep everything. So,
bye, guys.
Bye, Ryan. Yeah, we'll finish up here.
Thank you for dealing with us for an hour.
Yeah, it was so good to see Ryan. I mean, I had not met her, even though you guys were in North Carolina, because it just never worked out when you would come here. But anyway, so read that one for us. I can read it.
Explain anomalies at Qumran that run counter to the presence of purification community. Proximity of latrines closer to 300 cubits or cemeteries close to dwellings. A multi-use garrison prior to the sect.
Yeah, let's explain that. It is controversial. What Doc's getting at here is that from the sectarian scrolls, we call it the scrolls that the sect themselves wrote about their own beliefs, their halakhic practices, their rituals, and so forth. They say things like the latrines have to be outside the camp, and they have to be out of sight of the dwellers in the settlement of Qumran, if that's where they are. And that's the question. And the cemetery also should be removed from the dwellings. At least it can't be in the living area. I personally am convinced that Qumran pretty well fits the community that wrote the scrolls. After you've got Cave 4 right there in their backyard, when you go there and you look across Wadi Qumran, and there it is, you can almost reach out and touch it. And that's the mother lode cave with thousands and thousands of fragments of scrolls, over 15,000 fragments, many of them related to the group. So they're hiding things. They're hiding their library. The latrines are okay because depending on the size of the cubit, Josias and I were able to locate the latrines up outside, and there is a perimeter all around the camp. Today it's a wall about a meter high, sometimes half a meter. So it would have been higher in the time before it was destroyed. But it could have been a garrison before the use of the sect. But I think the cemetery, from the tombs that have been opened randomly, kind of random sample, they're very consistent. They tend to be male. There are a few females on the perimeters, but they don't have grave goods. They don't have beads and weapons and any kind of treasure, anything. It's just a body, a male body wrapped in a shroud, slotted in 6 feet under. And so I think most of the archaeology fits. I would recommend Jody Magnus's book, The Archaeology of Qumran. She's at Chapel Hill, where Bart Ehrman teaches. And she's really wrote a really fine book on the archaeology of Qumran. And she does revise and call into question a lot of the theories that had been proposed before her. But I think generally there's always some challenges. And I don't think the sect built the settlement. It goes back to the Iron Age, and it did exist, and they occupy it, so to speak. I hope that helps, but particularly take a look at some of the latest. Joan Taylor is another person, academia.edu. Derek, you're going to have to get Joan on sometime to talk about this. She's really one of the best. And she's published recently things. You can download them free on reassessing the archaeology at Qumran. So there's all these opinions, but my sense is that the site fits the scrolls fairly well. And also think where it is. You talk about the 50-yard line of the apocalypse is Jerusalem, the Kidron Valley, between the Mount of Olives and the Old City. Well, the 50-yard line of the apocalypse for these people is right across from Mount Nebo and Pisgah, where Moses last appeared, because and he's buried, according to Deuteronomy, in that valley. And if you look across, you can see from where they are, the northwest corner of the Dead Sea, right across from where Moses last saw the Holy Land and didn't enter. And they believe in a prophet like Moses coming again. So they're kind of like waiting there for the Messiah to come, I think. And then remember, the tombs are facing north, not toward Jerusalem, so that when somebody is rose from the dead, they'll face the north. So I think they're strategically locating. A garrison using prior to the sect would not orient their tombs north and south. They would orient them toward Jerusalem if it's Jewish. And these tombs are definitely Jewish. So I think a lot of it fits the group. I really do. But remember, this is not the whole, I call this the spiritual headquarters. It's the West Point of the group. It's where the teacher and his devoted male followers lived a celibate life in were part of this elite community, like a monastery, really. But
Right.
that doesn't mean that there weren't adherents all over the Holy Land that kind of believed in this messianic movement. So,
Neil, just to get your little 2 cents here, just a quick brief comment. We'll keep moving because I want to try and get through these. Weren't you a little bit shocked at how far, when we were right there where everybody sees the photo of the Dead Sea Scroll cave, it's cave 4, you said, like everybody knows that picture online, but like standing there, seeing that cave, if you just turned around miles, the Dead Sea, like you see the whole spectrum of land.
right.
Comment
And
on
you
that,
guys
Rick.
walked up to those caves, didn't you? Walked up to
Yeah,
cave
like,
11.
I went inside the caves, and I even went through the hole that was like just barely enough for your body. I got that on video.
Oh, you crazy.
Yeah,
I almost did. I was worried. First of all, if that would have fell,
Which
you
is
would have been
possible.
dead.
Would've been
I don't
dead.
think we
I
could
don't
have
know
got
why.
you.
Now that I'm looking back, I was like, that was dumb.
Neil, I hope your lungs are okay, because that guana bat stuff gets in your lungs and you're really messed up from that. So I hope.
Yeah.
And by the way, no tours do that. That's the funny thing. Like we literally do things that you cannot get on any tour. And I even got that upper cave above the cave that we were in. I swear I almost thought I'm not going to make it down because I was so dehydrated and wasn't prepared and didn't have good shoes on.
I was worried about you guys going too far, but I was down below with the rest of the group going, they need to come back now.
And we did, of course, but I wouldn't have done it if I didn't.
Yeah, I was doing this. All right. But honestly, my thoughts were, because I personally think the Nag Hammadi discovery was the biggest of all time, but the Dead Sea Scrolls, I kept thinking when I was there, these caves were holding onto something that was going to change scholarship forever, and no one knew that it was just sitting there the whole time. And then finally they find it, and now everything's changed now. Like that's kind of a crazy thing to think about.
It is. No, the feeling too. Masada, the same thing. I know we didn't mention Masada, but there's, we don't take the beaten path of the tourists. They all go to Herod's Palace and they do a 1-hour tour. We did a 2.5-hour tour of Masada. I know it's a lot, but when we got down to the south and there's nobody around, and remember I told you guys, just be quiet and feel the desert. Wow. And we told the story and it was just amazing.
Going down into the huge cistern. I mean, there's just thinking about, it's crazy. It's really nuts. They're on this giant mountain, like almost, you feel like there's this mountain, it's cut off so people can't just get to you. And then what really blew my mind is when you get over to, I'm not sure what side that was, and saw how aggressive the Romans really were. And they would build that is insane. They built a road to the top of the damn thing.
That's the ramp. Yeah, that's on the west side. Yeah, they built.
I'm just
that's to take it over. Yeah, right.
Like and how even far they're willing to go, though, it just blows my mind how far they're willing to go.
Some people think Josephus exaggerated that account, but actually, a lot of it seems to hold up. There are debates about that, but further excavations.
Well, you
Herod,
definitely see a ramp.
Herod the Great. Yeah, he built a huge, beautiful palace there as a refuge in case, Josephus says, a native Messiah would arise and try to depose him. That was the big threat of his whole life, because he wasn't really Jewish by birth. He was a son of an Arab woman and an Idumean who had converted to Judaism. So
right. Thank you, James. Mr. Monster, what do we know about the current doing the rock being inside the old Roman fort and not the actual Temple Mount? What about real City of David location?
I'm thinking, does he mean the rock, the Dome of the Rock?
I would guess.
There, real quick.
Well, we can't go in the Dome of the Rock today, but in the past, I've been in it many times, and it is pretty prominent under the Golden Dome. And that's why it's not a mosque, by the way. It's called the Dome of the Rock. The idea is to protect the rock. The rock is there. And Rittmeyer, who's done the most work on locating Herod's temple and so forth, he shows how central that is and answers, I think, all of the questions about where it was located. So I'm not it could be that Mr. Monster's thinking of Ernest Martin's theory and others that have claimed that the Temple Mount was a Roman camp. Have you heard that theory? That where we say the temple is, that's a Roman camp. The temple is down to the south. I don't think that holds up at all, because we know after the destruction of Jerusalem, the 10th Legion stayed in Jerusalem. If there's a Roman camp, they would be right there in the Roman camp, but they're on Mount Zion. And we know that archaeologically. Remember that sword we saw in the Israel Museum, the Roman sword? It's the only one ever found intact with the sheath. That was found on Mount Zion, where I excavate with Dr. Gibson and others. So I think that's what he's talking about. It's the theory that the temple in the time of Jesus was down south over basically in the Kidron down toward the Hinnom Valley, the city of David, where you went with the Gihon Spring.
Me and Neil went at night. Wait till you guys see the footage. We went down into the valley of Hinnom. We went to hell itself. So,
and Ross Nichols is the guy who's writing the book on this Siloam inscription, and he explained to you guys, and I think he made a big discovery that he hasn't even revealed yet about, remember, they removed the original, but you guys were feeling the seams, and I remember Ross, he doesn't want it public yet, but he made a big discovery as to where the original actually was, because it's in Turkey now. They've removed it.
Ross, I want to point something out. So when you guys split up with us in Masada, you two went one place, and me and Ross went another place. This blew my mind. So anyone who watches my channel for a long time, you'll recognize this image. I used to use this as my background. Turns out
all of a sudden you're there. Yeah, you're there.
I was looking at this. I filmed a 10-minute video in front of it. I'm going to upload it to my channel. Me and Ross talking about it. So I was like,
this is Herod's palace. Yeah.
Yeah, when I walked in, I go, wait a minute, this is Masada? I used to have this as my background for like 6 months. And here I am standing right there. It was mind-blowing. So
a lot of those images online that we see, we just don't know. And then we go there and we're like, are you kidding me? This is that spot. Like those zodiac signs that were on the floor, the mosaics of the floors of synagogues. Finally, James said, hey, we're going to go see this zodiac floor synagogue mosaic. And I'm like, wait, is it the one online? And he's like, I think it might be the one online that you might have been familiar. And we show up and I'm like, this is where that we've been taking pictures of this from Google 1,000 times.
And there's actually 5 of them. We saw 2. We saw the one in Tiberias, and we saw the one at Sepphoris.
Oh, Derek, so. you made a wallpaper, or you made a thumbnail for me for the video I did with Bruce Kilton. Mm-hmm. And we used the mosaic that we found in Sepphoris of the woman, the beautiful woman mosaic. We used that. We didn't even know what it was. I'm just like, this is crazy.
Mind-boggling. J-Dub Nomo, thank you for the super chat. I just want to thank you all for your fantastic content, and lovely to see your beautiful wife by your side today. Thank you.
Yeah, it was so great to have Ryan. And see, Ryan, like I said, she was filming. So the guys have in mind, because you want to do a documentary, really, like walking the Holy Land and so forth.
A course,
but she would catch things as a backup and also a kind of addendum all the time. I would just look and go, oh man, she's filming, you know. So her footage on that camera, that little handheld camera, is going to be something, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that super chat. Cheddar Bay Baby, thank you for the super chat. Does Luke's gospel depart from Paul and Judaism and believing in a paradise after death apart from resurrection? Did you visit the gates of hell? Is Caesarea Philippi, and did it have that same significance to Jews? Oh, goodness gracious.
Yeah, you guys love that. Well, let's start with Luke. That's the famous passage where Jesus is on the cross with these 2, we call them thieves, but that's a bad translation. It's the same word, lestes, that Josephus used for brigands, meaning guys that are against the government, or they got arrested for being potentially violent.
Yeah, rebels.
Think of
basically.
January 6th or something, like taking over the Capitol. So
Yeah.
they're arrested. And one of them is deriding Jesus. And the other one says, don't deride him. Like, we're guilty, but this guy was innocent. So that sounds very theological, because Luke is like, Pilate's innocent, Jesus is innocent, Roman soldiers are innocent, Father, forgive them. Everybody in Luke is innocent, because repentance and forgiveness of sins.
Except the Jews. Except the Jews.
But he
That's-
doesn't emphasize the Jews as much as
That's true. It's
not like
it's,
Matthew. Yeah.
It's according to Shelley Matthews and some of the other scholars I've been talking to, it's more anti-Judaism. Like there's already this split. And who gets blamed and who gets every single time. Herod Antipas, Christians are innocent. Roman soldiers, Christians are innocent. I mean, so much so that even Paul's saying, hey, take me to Caesar. Okay. You're going to find out we're innocent all the way to the top. But that's the fiction in a way, or the painted narrative they want you to see to Theophilus, who might be a God-fearing Gentile who has a lot of money, I would imagine. And if they see that hey, all these Christians are being imprisoned, and are they really guilty? No. Look, here's the history, giving you the true, accurate account. They're trying to make Christianity look like it's not guilty.
So one of the guys is making fun of Jesus and, not admitting his own guilt. And the other guy is going, this guy's innocent. You shouldn't be condemning him. And Jesus says, I tell you to, and then he asked Jesus to save him. And he says, I tell you today, you'll be with me in paradise. So the idea would be that you go to paradise after death. And whether it's a departure from Paul and Judaism is a question, because Paul talks about the third heaven, and he talks about then going into paradise. And some put the paradise in the third heaven, like some of the Enoch materials so somehow there's a interim state of the dead. And that apparently is what in Luke, the Jesus figure has in mind. You're going to be okay. You're going to be, paradise is the good side and Gehenna is the bad side, but it's not the final judgment. It's like just as Christians sometimes believe today, like when you die, you already experience something about your fate. But gates of hell, yes, we did visit it. And
Neil and me were in love.
If he's standing at Caesarea Philippi, which Mark says he is, this is Mark chapter 8, and you got all these images, and he goes, who do people say that I am? What a question to pop in front of images of Pan and all the gods and the temple of Augustus that's been found now. Of Augustus, the emperor, there's a temple there that Herod built. And he says, who do people say that I am? And they start naming people. And Peter says, well, you're the Messiah. And in Matthew's account, he goes, I'm going to build my church on this rock of my messiahship, and the gates of Hades won't prevail against it. And you're standing right there at the great. So that is probably, it's almost like, how we tell children all these mythological fairy tales and stories. It might have been something like that, where you go, watch out. If you go through the Kidron Valley, the ghost of Judas is going to get you because he hung himself there. It might be something kind of like that. Or watch out. Don't go up to the grotto of Pan, because you could get sucked into Hades and go into the underworld. But it was a tradition. Yes.
Yeah.
I just want to say, like, for me, right, I'm going to start on this particular issue, right, that's in the text. You got to go. If you can, go with James. I promise you,
you went to hell twice, actually, Derek. You went to the gates of hell, and then another time you went into hell.
Yes, we did.
And everybody that goes, I promise you can get what I call a hell stone, not a hailstone, a little rock out of Hell Valley, which is right at the bottom of the Kidron, where we'll go. And you can take it home.
Hell isn't that bad, everybody. Don't worry.
It's not
that bad.
But it was the garbage dump of ancient Jerusalem, where the worm dies not and the fire is not quenched. It's not an image of torture, by the way. You know
I wanted to say on the Caesarea Philippi thing, though, this what you're saying and how important the geography here is, whether or not Jesus really stood here and said, and you even tried to hint at this, Neil, when we were there and we were doing live streams. You thought maybe Jesus might be more Hellenistic than we think.
Yeah.
Because just pretend, right? We can paint different pictures here, but Jesus is standing. We were there at the Temple of Pan, the remains of it, the Temple of Herod, and the Temple of Augustus, right here,
right next to it. Yeah,
we see the portal. I see the foundation. I'm recording the foundation. I see the portal. The water's extremely low. It's almost dried out right now because it's just not season for it to be up. And I'm thinking to myself, as you said, Jesus says, "Who do men say that I am?" The emphasis of that in a location where here you have God-men like Caesar, you have demigods and gods from the Greco-Roman or the Mediterranean world here. Very significant location. You just said this rock, right?
And that's Mount Tabor, right?
Well, near there.
No.
Or I'm sorry, not
yeah.
Tabor. Is that what it is? Or no, Hermon, right?
Hermon, I thought it was.
No, Hermon is up in that area, but
okay,
that's not Mount Hermon itself.
It's kind of near Syria's right
But
there.
it is the nexus of divinity in the ancient Near East. You've got Mount Hermon, which is the north. It's where the gods live. And then you've got Hades down below. It's a mini cosmos.
That's what I'm getting at. Yeah.
And here you got Jesus getting transfigured on Mount Hermon. And notice in Mark, it's definitely not Mount Tabor. Mount Tabor is like a hill in your grandfather's backyard.
That was a typo.
It's not.
I didn't mean to say that.
It's not that big. I'm sorry. It's my name, but
maybe because you're here. That's why I said.
But you go to Mount Hermon. Do you realize the symbolism? It says he took them to a very high mountain.
Mm-hmm.
So now I'm up high. High as the gods, the clouds, right?
This is
and
literally
then we go,
the clouds. Yeah.
And then we go down to Hades. It's literally a picture of the entire cosmos.
Right.
So you talk about I am the Christ and the gates of hell will not prevail. And you're right there.
He's right
now,
there. That's
the
crazy.
gospel writers could have used that as a setting. There's no question
That's
about
what
it.
I'm thinking.
That's
but on the other hand, the historical Jesus he was well aware of Greco-Roman culture, demigods and people being declared gods. He's living near Sepphoris, where theater productions are going on, presenting Greek culture all the time. And he might have wanted to make this point. And remember, he's not just being followed by Jews. Right. If you go by the accounts that we have, people from the Decapolis are following him. We already talked about the Decapolis are the pagan Roman cities on the other side of the Jordan.
Right.
So why are they following him?
That's my point. That's the reason why I have the hypothesis that I don't think he was just purely on the Jewish side. I think he had some modern, maybe.
Well, I think we should start rejecting the dichotomies. Paula Friedrichsen talks about this. Everybody in my field is talking more and more about this. These silos of Jewish, Greek, Roman.
Right.
Jonathan Smith, my teacher at Chicago, this brilliant scholar of Hellenistic religions, he argued that religion is a creation of the academy. We created religion in the 19th century by calling this is Judaism, this is Christianity, this is Islam, this is it. Whereas what you really have is people. Neil, did you grow up Roman Catholic by chance?
I did, actually.
Or were you in a Catholic? Because you're Northeast. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's say we're in Philadelphia, on the street in Philadelphia. Or what's a more Catholic town? Boston. So we're in Boston, right? Catholic. And we're at a bar having a beer. You say, this whole room is full of Catholics. Like the religion or the culture? You see? I'm going to start interviewing the Catholics. One of them go, I don't believe in a virgin birth, man. That's crazy. I got to go to mass, though, right now.
Exactly. That's how it is. Twice a year.
It's people experiencing and living life with certain beliefs and ideas.
Yeah.
And this is what Jonathan Adler is saying, too. It's not like Judaism. Yes, some Jews had stone vessels and mikvahs in their homes and wore seat, those strings on their garments? Some Jews. But did everybody in the whole Hellenistic world were marching like 10 soldiers with these little Jewish uniforms on? Absolutely not. He
That's
even
why
points out that they don't even forbid eating pork in like, we don't have evidence that they weren't necessarily, abstaining from or following the dietary laws or the festivals. So
right. I put a question mark. You talk about your scale 1, 2, and 3 as far as like what happened here. I'm on a 1. That doesn't mean I can't go further into 2 or 3. It's just I'm more thinking the geography here is more theological and significant in a different way, a literary way, than saying this actually happened. However, there is a question mark, because if that model we're describing about Jesus is important, answering the final part of this question, and just to give my 2 cents, and then if you feel like adding icing in a cherry, is that did it have the same significance, these regions, this location, Caesarea Philippi, to Jews? And we drove, when we were in the bus, we drove from the coast. We went all the way from the coast. We went into Nazareth and Sepphoris. And then it wasn't but like a 30, 45-minute bus drive east. And here we are in Caesarea Philippi. We're in this huge region. I can't imagine that these locations weren't significant to Jews. And if Jesus was this guy that you've, I think, done a good job trying to paint the picture. Here's this guy, kind of like a redneck, okay? There's major cities, but he's born in like this little backwater, and he comes out. He's not okay with seeing this, what's going on in the world, in his own town, what's happened with Rome, what's happened with the lake where his family's fishing, or friends are fishing, and they're making their living. Now it's being controlled. You have tax collectors who are coming into the scene. There's a lot that plays into this. I'm thinking of John Kloppenborg's Christ Associations book, where he's talking about these little enclaves of groups that labor. They're passing these stories and messages around. The gospel's getting spread. Paul is a tent maker. He's passing around these stories. You kind of start thinking maybe there's more to it. I don't know, and I wouldn't bet on it at all that this happened historically here in Caesarea Philippi, that this really happened, but I wouldn't rule out the possibility, of course.
But at least you're seeing the backdrop of the story, even if it is the focus of a more mythological retelling.
Right.
At least you're seeing it. It's like talking about the United States government, but you've never been to Washington, D.C. And you don't even know the difference between the Pentagon, the Capitol, the Washington Monument, the Lincoln Memorial Gallery. I don't know any of that. Then how would you understand anything if something happened there? It's the same kind of thing. You gotta go. And I'm speaking to myself here. Bart Ehrman. Oh, by the way, I sat in on Bart's podcast. We recorded it 2 weeks ago, but it was put up yesterday or Tuesday. And it's got 22,000 views like in one day. So you guys check that out. We always like to promote Bart. But Bart was just telling me today in an email, we're writing back and forth, because I want to travel. I want he and I to travel together in the future. And he was just saying that to have that context is so important, even though he is very much a text guy, as we know, Bible text, misquoting Jesus and all that. But you've got to know the context as well. And it does just change your whole perspective.
I feel good, because behind the scenes, I was actually contacted, and they were like, we're interviewing James Tabor, but what are we going to interview him about? And I was like, are you kidding me? Paul and Jesus, man. You got to get into his Paul book and dive deep.
You kind of set me up for that one. Yeah.
Well, I'm feeling pretty privileged to be in the position I'm in and helping people. So Yeshua the King, thank you for the super chat. No theology. What percentage of the New Testament historical claims are accurate in your opinion? I want to give that to you, James. And how does it compare to other historical works? Thanks.
I go really high on that, not to shock anybody. It really, though, would depend on what you include, as New Testament's a big thing. So if you go to the book of Jude or Second Peter that are so full of all kinds of mythology, you know, is that historical or not? Tartarus, you know, oh, Tartarus is historical because it's mentioned in Second Peter, you know, that's the underworld of the Greeks. But I think probably Yeshua da King might be referring more to this kind of thing we're talking about, like the lay of the land, the names of the cities, the places, the roads, the towns, the general structure of history, that Herod the Great did this, and then his son Herod Antipas took over, and who fortified Masada. I believe large percentages of that check out. And you would expect them to, because these documents were written within, you know, 30, 40, 50 years. As I get older, Derek and Neil, I'm 76 years old. I don't feel that old, but I am. And I was just talking to
that old.
Yeah, and I was talking to some friends that I knew in Chicago, and I thought that was 50 years ago. 50, because I was 26 years old. You know what? I remember exact conversations with them, like at bars and things we talked about and things we did, you know, when I was in school 50 years ago. So if they're right, if they're in the land writing, or sources within the land, I think they tend to reflect the stuff that is there. So in that sense, I think it's accurate. A good example would be like Joseph of Arimathea, who's according to all of our accounts, you know, John, the Synoptics, Gospel of Peter, and so forth, was the one to whom Pontius Pilate gave permission for the burial of Jesus. Now, you're going to find probably over half of my colleagues who work in New Testament as historians would say that's probably just, there's no such thing as Joseph of Arimathea. He didn't exist. That's just, you know, made up. I would tend to think that there's some historical reality to that story, just like Simon of Cyrene, which also seems kind of made up. Oh, yeah, guy carried Jesus' cross. And there I would go kind of with Richard Bauckham, who's a really great historian of religions. And Richard tries to make his point in about the names that are within the New Testament and the Gospels, how people know each other. They were talking about a kind of a small movement, that there's a certain chattiness among the people, you know, where people can look at Paul's greetings at the end of Romans. That's talked about a lot. You know, tell this person hello and this person, and oh yeah, Aquila and Priscilla came by the other day and they said this and that, and we can kind of track some of their movements. But he starts with saying no theology. If you put the theology in, like, oh, Joseph of Arimathea, and he was a rich man, and that fulfilled Isaiah 53, then that's different.
Yeah.
You know, then you can see how that would be used by Matthew to say, oh, prophecy fulfilled, a rich guy buried Jesus. But Mark doesn't say anything about it being his tomb. Have you noticed that? And John even says that it's not his tomb. He didn't say it's Joseph's tomb. He says it's a tomb nearby that happened to be near the cross. And Passover's coming, so we had to put the guy in a tomb and block it up so he doesn't get eaten by predators over the next 3 days of the feast. You see the idea? Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So it's not, I mean, Joseph of Arimathea, he wouldn't have a tomb that just happened to be by the cross. Like, oh, wow, I'm going to put my tomb next to where they kill people. I like that area, you know?
Yeah.
So I'm going to go with it.
There's more history there than
very much more on it. And part of it is from going there 73 times and just seeing this stuff.
You've been there many. James Russell, Christian Middle Earth, thank you for the super chat. Was Paul an anthropological physicalist or dualist?
It's tricky because monism in the Hellenistic world can sound like dualism when it's really monistic, meaning as you go into the higher spheres of the seven heavens, it's not as though there's material here and then spiritual stuff up there. That's where we are today. We're all dualists. You know, everybody's become a dualist. But in the ancient world, the planetary spheres, the sun, the moon, those are also made out of, quote, stuff, but it's lighter stuff and it's airy stuff. You know, Paul says, for example, I think it's Paul, the prince of the power of the air, but air is a thing. And then you've got these forces, you know, these in the world below and the world above and so forth. So it's hard to, I find the word physical, material, spiritual to be not as useful because they project onto the ancient world assumptions that we would make today. Like today, everybody's a dualist. I'm talking about, I'm not, but I'm a monist. But Christians tend to be like, oh, you die and your body goes to the earth, but your soul or spirit goes to heaven. It's like two worlds. I call it two. All the religions go for two worlds, don't they? Just about. Can you think of any religion that have this world and the other world? And you belong in the other world, and that's the whole point of the religion, to get you from this world to the other world. Well, what if this world is the other world? And you say, yeah, but it's just like muck and stuff. Really? Have you been to the birth of your child? Derek has. You know, I mean, the wonder of people. Well, that's just nature. What do you mean, just nature? You know, what is so amazingly, you know, just beyond words and explanation. It's wondrous. And I think your most hard-nosed scientist would say that. Say, well, it's just physical. What do you mean just physical? Didn't Einstein teach us that En equals mc squared? So this thing we call matter, that's just physical, is actually energy. So what does physical mean? So I just can't accept the definitions that people project onto the cosmos. I don't know what a black hole is. I don't understand multiverses. I don't understand quantum physics. Say, well, that's just physical. What about spiritual stuff? These are just words. How about the known and the unknown, the mysterious and the understood? Like if I raise this napkin off my desk, it's not that mysterious. But if I think that I was a one-celled being in the womb of my mother, your mother just walked up, Derek Lambert was this tiny little sperm and ovum, one cell, and it split into two, and that's you talking right now. Say, well, that's just physical.
Yeah.
So what are you arguing for? I'm not arguing for anything. I'm arguing for your mouth dropping open at what is, the wonder of what is. Why do we have to call it?
I think that's a great.
Why do we have to call it things? Just call it what is.
Yeah.
So I believe in what is. How about that? That's what I believe. So, well, do you think this exists? If it is, then I accept it.
Ricky Johnson, thank you for showing up, being a member of Myth Vision, and that super sticker. Ross K. Nichols in the house. He took your offer there, James. He said Tabor takes his tours to key sites off the beaten path. There is no one alive who brings the Second Temple to life better than Tabor. Scholars, students, and skeptics will benefit from his tour. Go!
Get that link in the description.
Yeah, I'm worried about it filling up because I know several people have written me because of my YouTube channel. You know, I really want to go the next. When you went, it's full. Damn, there's a waiting list. I want to go the next time. I think I said earlier, I think we have 5 or 6 places left. So if somebody really wants to go, jump on it. It always fills, but I'd like it to fill with some of your fans and your listeners and viewers who have just studied this stuff for years and really want to do what you did. Yeah. And whether I'm the best, I don't know, but I try to, share with you what I've learned. I will say this, without bragging, I have not only been to many of these sites, but I've actually participated in excavations. So it's not just a casual acquaintance as a tourist, but I know the people involved and some of the things that have gone on. And I've made a few major discoveries myself along the way. So
absolutely.
Thanks,
Ross. Inquisitive Mind. Dome of the Rock seems like a modern name. Is it?
Yeah, I think it is. I'm not even sure in English. I do know that it's become Muslim to people, which is really a very recent idea. Jews in, let's say, 1880, 1900, 1910, 1920 had placemats of the Dome of the Rock on their table. You said, well, why would they have a Muslim place? Because it wasn't Muslim. They believed that's where Abraham was, Mount Moriah, where Abraham took Isaac to potentially sacrifice him. So to them, it would be a Jewish site. Why is it holy? Really goes back to Abraham. So it's holy to all three religions. I just don't know in English when that term first comes up. You know what we could do is check Mark Twain. You know, Innocents Abroad. Do you have that? Not right now, but check it. I have it. You know, Mark Twain went to the Holy Land in the 1860s, and he did all the touring before. When we go now, we're 20, 30 feet below the levels that you could see when he was there. That's why you can walk on pavement that Jesus of Nazareth absolutely walked on, because the roads and the trails have now been uncovered from the Herodian period, assuming he lived in the first century and walked. Okay. So Hillel, whoever you like, you know, Gamaliel, whatever figure you like from antiquity, Pontius Pilate. I mean, he did have to walk around the city, I would assume, you know. So whoever you like, you can walk. But when Mark Twain went, it wasn't like that. Nothing had been excavated. Like that Pilate's judgment seat we started with, that was 30 feet below the ground. You saw the buildup from the growth of plants on the wall. Yeah. The soil was up to where those plants stopped. That's why the plants are growing there, because it's still moist from being under soil for, let's see, 2,000 years. So it does seem like a modern name, but I want to check. When Mark Twain walks around the old city, or Shapira, we can also look at Shapira and other this would be a question for Ross, because he's really studying these 19th century guys. When they went up to the Haram, or the Temple Mount, as the Jews call it, Haram as the Muslims call it, what did they call that thing? Because it was there. By the way, it wasn't golden. It wasn't golden until King Hussein of Jordan had it plated with gold, fairly recently, you know, like in the 1950s or 40s. When I first went to Jerusalem in 1960, it was just a gray metal kind of dome, but it didn't have the gold plating on it. You can see pictures easily on that if you just type in 19th century. But I really don't know the answer to that question, but it should be something you can find out rather easily.
Thank you. Appreciate that super chat. I got to try and get through these because the wife and I have to go do something here shortly.
Yeah. Well, let's get
Bradford
through
Baldwin says, brilliant. Thanks, Doc. Just looked up Jerash, Temple of Zeus, Ark of Hadrian, and more. This
Absolutely.
Is going to be awesome.
Go for it. And
Derek
at one point in the Temple of Zeus, they show you how the priest would magically make a voice come out of the rock. And you would go, oh, Zeus, should I marry, you know, whoever, Madonna? And he would go, yes, you should. Or no, you should not. And it's all through this ventriloquist little chamber. You'll see that when you go there. It's really cool.
Great. That's so cool.
Yeah, there were sites
we
we did
down below going, give me the questions and I'll answer them, like Johnny Carson used to do with his little, you know, fortune telling thing.
Oh my gosh. Bradford, thank you again for the super chat. I hope you enjoyed the trip. Can't wait to hear about it. He's also a patron of mine. So message me and let me know. Did you visit Mea Sherim in Jerusalem?
Absolutely, we did, because as we drove into the city, our bus driver took a wrong turn, remember? And he goes through that thick Orthodox area where there's traffic and people going around. And it took us like half an hour to get out because there's so many pedestrians. So yes, we did visit it, but we didn't stop. But we saw plenty of, people call them Orthodox Jews. It just means, you know, there's like at least 10 to 20 major sects of Judaism that are in Jerusalem that are observant Jews. Observant's probably a better word, because Orthodox can also mean Orthodox Christians. They're Jews that observe the Torah according to rabbinic interpretation. Yes. Way over half the city, probably. In Jerusalem. Tel Aviv, no.
Right.
On Friday
Here we are
night,
again.
even, you can go to bars and eat and drink and just live like any Western city.
Thank you so much for that. Sean Stennett. I don't have an opinion on this, but why would Jesus' family tomb be in Jerusalem? Wouldn't it be in Nazareth where he's from? Thank you for the super chat.
Yeah, I've addressed that in my book, The Jesus Discovery. We talk quite a bit about that. Yeah, by Jewish law, you need to bury within 24 hours, if possible, 48 at the most, but preferably before sundown. And this idea of transporting bodies when somebody dies is just not done. And so basically people are buried, like Simon of Cyrene is buried in Jerusalem, even though he's a Jew from Cyrene. He's buried there. And Jerusalem becomes kind of the center. There's a lot that's done on this, a lot of discussion of it. So dig into my books and I've also put a lot on my blog.
And just to be fair, James, isn't it fair to say Paul, when he references, if you take the James, the brother of the Lord passage to obviously mean his brother, Jesus' brother, wouldn't this be clear? He clearly is emphasizing Jerusalem as the headquarters where James is at. So even if they were born and raised, let's say in the Galilee or in Nazareth, they kind of move headquarters to Jerusalem. So therefore, what's the problem with burying the rest of your family where you die, where you live?
Well, the other thing is, remember, Jerusalem is 6 miles north of Bethlehem. And if you did go with the Bethlehem family tradition, I'm not talking about the Christmas story, but that Jesus comes from a Davidic family that traces itself to Bethlehem, the Talpiot tomb is on the ridge where Jerusalem is to the north and Bethlehem's to the south. So there's a sense in which it would actually be closer to his family heritage. Like you went back to Washington State. Mm-hmm. That's where you're from, even though you lived in North Carolina for a long time.
Right.
So, you probably have relatives, I don't know in your case, but maybe buried in the Washington area. Americans travel more than these ancient people, but don't think of Jerusalem as alien to the Davidic family in general, whether Joseph is his father or not.
Thank you. Doc Pleroma, not again. Thank you, my friend. In 2 Corinthians 10:16, Canon is translated many ways: field, limits, regions, etc. Like Paul, 2 Clement used the word in a similar sphere of influence sense. But is this a borrowed secular word with geographical nuances?
Boy, Doc is always way ahead of me on these things because I'd have to do a study on that word. You'd want to look in Liddell Scott, first of all, to see how it was used in various Greek texts. I think in general, like in English, it can have this is my sense, Doc, can have a very diverse use, so that we could even talk about the canon of English literature is all male dominated. And you go like, the canon of English literature, what do you mean? The general field, limits, regions, and body of material that we are taught to consider high literature. It's all male and it's all white, right? But we talk about the canon, but there's no canon. Like Shakespeare's not bound with Goethe, and so forth, you see. So we use it to mean, and then we talk about canon law in the Catholic Church. Canon law. What is canon law? Limits, field. So clearly it means something like areas, regions, limits, but it could mean everything from, I could say the sanctuary of my office I'm sitting in here, it's limited. And I don't want certain things coming in here. I'm not that kind of scholar, but some people are like that. It's like their sanctuary. I don't care if my mom comes in or my wife or my kids or my dogs and jump up on the table while I'm talking. But for some people, that would be like the canon of their domain. So I think it's, I need to look at in 2 Corinthians 10. I know he wants to go to these other regions. I think that's a good translation. I don't remember. I like the metaphorical use of Clement. I haven't looked at that in 2 Clement. I haven't remembered that. But yeah, sphere of influence sounds right. What would be the canon of your YouTube stations or channels reach? The perimeters, the canon. Well, mainly we're dealing with a demographic of, disenfranchised 20 and 30 and 40-year-olds who gave up Christianity.
Pretty much.
Which probably isn't true. But, maybe that would be your canon. And my canon would probably be these old guys that listen to old professors like me.
Well, are you trying to say I'm old? Anyway, thank you so much for answering that. Ken Scaletta, hello, Dr. Tabor. What do you believe Jesus actually did at the temple to cause a ruckus, and why?
Boy, that's tough. It's called the cleansing of the temple. I probably will betray my prejudices and my proclivities here, but I think he's protesting animal sacrificing. And so, yes, the commerce that goes on with it, the cheating, the money changing, where people come with coin of the realm where they live, and then they have to change it into other coin, finding animals without a blemish. You bring something from where you live and they, that won't be acceptable and so forth. That's all part of it. But because he quotes Jeremiah, or at least the gospel writer Mark does, I think it's a protest against sacrifice. And we do get other texts in the Ebionite stream, like the Gospel of the Hebrews, Gospel of the Ebionites. They talk about if you do not cease sacrifice, the wrath of God will not cease from you, and so forth. There's something theological going on there. And so that's kind of like your gates of hell.
I also see that
it could be the group later wanting to maintain this vegetarian ideal that James and John the Baptist, and I would say Jesus, followed. But
the kind of thing you're describing here, James, reminds me of Revelation. So Jesus's theology or his outlook might be in line with this kind of radical outlook that we're seeing in Revelation of like taking the mark and abstaining from this whoredom with Rome and such. So I would imagine he was more apocalyptic in that revelation sense. Yeah.
Any certain event like that? I mean, the walking on water, did Jesus really do that? Did he really multiply the food? Did he do this, that, and the other? I think most historians who work with history would not take miracles literally. I guess clearing out the temple in that Solomon's court area doesn't have to be a miracle, but the line we're always working with is what we said for the whole hour and a half here is the line, or 2 hours. God, we've been almost going 2 hours, I think. Yeah, it's the line between something that serves the theological, mythological ideas of the later authors versus what might be grounded in actual history.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times we just can't tell. But what we can do on a trip like this, back to the tour, is you can see where that was. You can walk on the steps going up, and you could realize that the author of Mark is proclaiming something with the 3 gates, the Hulda gates, going into the temple, because he says the disciples blocked them. Once Jesus went in, they basically said, temple's closed today. Our teacher's doing this or that. So that the setup seems to reflect something that's on the ground, but whether what happened as reported is exactly the same. And then you've got the account in John that is quite different. So,
yeah.
John,
thank you, Ken. Good question. Gray's 174. If Jesus's missing body is simply explained by relocation, did nobody tell the disciples what happened when they started proclaiming resurrection?
I don't think they're interested in bodies. I've talked to Eric. In fact, Eric, the little thing we put up, we did an interview, which I'll push right now. You and I did an interview. I think it's like 12 minutes.
Yeah.
Probably over a year ago. And it was what Paul thought about resurrection, because he's our first witness and he's our only eyewitness. By eyewitness, I mean, he said, I saw this. Like Mark has no stories. Matthew tells you what people saw, but they're not telling you, right? Luke tells you, but those people aren't telling you. John tells you, but the people aren't telling you. Like, hey, I'm I slipped up. Simon, son of Jonah. I was thinking of Zebedee. I'm Simon, son of Jonah, and I saw this. We don't have anything like that. So we did this little 12-minute thing. I put it up last night at 11 o'clock. I just quickly edited a little bit, added some notes. And it's got like, I looked right before the program. It's like, why did the church disregard Paul as the first witness to the resurrection? And this is going to get to Gray's question. I think because it has nothing to do with the body. Yeah, check. What is it up to now? Probably 8,000 or something.
8,300.
Wow, that's a lot.
You're
And that's in
blowing
18
up.
hours. So clearly
Wow.
So you can watch that. Yeah.
Damn, I
remember
wonder
when
who
we did
filmed that. Whoever filmed
That was
that
the
must
very
be like,
first one that was the very first one we did. Yeah, together. So anyway, what's the point I'm making? The point is later they're interested in bodies because people are saying it's a ghost. Luke, right? It's a ghost. Maybe you just had an apparition. Matthew, they saw him on a mountain, but some doubted. Well, we need a body then. We can't just have visions. But when you ask Paul, what did you see? What kind of a body is the resurrection body? Which he says is going to be the body that his followers will have too. He says it'll be the same body. So we're talking about the same body. What is the resurrection body like? He actually says that is a foolish question because God will give it a body as pleases him. Remember that? 1 Corinthians 15. So when Paul describes his experience, it's more blinding light. Okay? Now, you say, well, they're running around Jerusalem saying he's risen. And somebody goes, well, here's his body here. In the Hellenistic mind, that has to do with nothing. That has to do with nothing. What do you mean? Here's his body here. Of course, that's his body, but he has been apotheosized into heaven. Because I think the earliest view of resurrection, you had somebody on recently that said this. Maybe it was Neil or you. Who was it? It was one of your main scholars. Maybe it wasn't Richard. It was somebody recently because I was listening to one of your programs. Okay. You'll remember if I tell you. He said that he really thinks the whole thing, because it was that guest you had that goes over all the accounts of apotheosis and transformation in the Hellenistic world. A lot of the time, it's just like, as Paul said, the clothing is left behind. The clothing is your body. And you now go up and get reclothed spiritually. So you go, but here's his clothing right here. I saw him go up to heaven, but here's his clothes. So who cares about his clothes? He's a star right now. I'll give you an example. There's a funerary inscription. It's one of my favorite. Hellenistic tomb, 2nd century BC, 1st or 2nd century, we're not sure. And he says, weep not, they're at the tomb, his friends, doing the annual remembrance of his yahrzeit, the day he died. They would pour wine and have like a picnic at the tomb, still done in Italy today, to remember the person. And he writes his epitaph, he has it written on the tombstone. It says, weep not for me, weep for yourselves. So his body is in the tomb. And he says, if you pour wine, you'll only make mud. Here, have a drink. Well, you're wasting the wine. Drink it yourself. But he says, I am a star that shines at midnight. See what he's saying?
Yeah.
Say, but your tomb's right here. How could you be a star that shines at midnight? What happens is later people like Celsus, we know, said this, but we know it must be earlier because of Luke 24. Maybe it was a ghost. You say that these women saw this and these men saw this and Peter saw this and James saw that. But what did they see? Maybe they saw a ghost. Oh, no. Jesus appeared in a room. He was flesh and bones. He held out his arm and said, feel that elbow there? Ghosts don't have elbows. Feel that. See these, look at this wound in my side. Look at these prints of nails in my either wrist or hand. I think hand is actually now what we think. They pin the hands to the cross kind of to keep them from moving. But anyway, that's another question of what was crucifixion. But do you see the idea?
Yeah.
Luke introduces that. John introduces it. Matthew does it. Matthew goes, we got 11 guys. Some doubted. Some to me means more than one. Out of 11, I think it means like 3 at least. So you got 11 disciples supposedly believing Jesus is raised. They're on a mountain in the Galilee. And they go like, whoa, yeah, you think that's him? I'm not convinced. You see what's happening? Yeah. It's moving from astral immortality, which is the common standard view, to we need a corpse walking around to prove he's really raised from the dead.
Right.
I always mention this, Derek. You've heard me mention this 10 times. The sea gives up the dead that are in it. Don't forget the sea.
Right.
How many thousands of people over the centuries have been lost at sea? And you really want to find bodies? What about cremation? What about rotting corpses? What about burning? Just like in a fire. I mean, this resurrection has nothing to do with finding these parts of the body in Paul's view, right? So I don't think, I actually do, I know this stretches people's imagination. I think people would visit the tomb of Jesus up until 70 AD and say, that's his tomb. But when I look up at the north, he's sitting at the right hand of God. He's been glorified. I think that's what Paul believed.
Thank you so much for that. Nile Valley Hebrew, thank you for becoming a member of the channel. I really appreciate it. Good to have you joined us. Captain Slow, and we have to wrap up here soon, Dr. Tabor. My wife is going to kill me if I don't. Would Paul
well,
be
they keep throwing you money, Derek. What are we going to do?
I know. I'm trying to be.
We'll just plan another session. But let's go
I do want to make sure we get these.
I'll try to give really quick answers. I'll give really quick answers.
Would Paul be one of Pharisees that was following Jesus during his missions? Would he hide the fact of meeting Jesus when he was alive? Keep up the great work.
I don't think he would, because I think he might have had a sighting of Jesus in Jerusalem because he lives there and he goes to the feasts and so forth. But I don't think he's keeping it quiet. And he makes a big point about we don't know Jesus after the flesh. And even if we once knew him that way, no longer. So that would be the body after the flesh. We don't, that's not the Jesus we know. So I don't know. I don't think he would be, I think he means like one of the Pharisees following Jesus before he died.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that fits too well. No.
But
he might have known about him for sure. Yeah.
Nile Valley Hebrew says, in the time of Christ, what do you think the northern kingdom dispersed Israelites would have been known as or called themselves? Greek, Roman, etc.
Maybe Cimmerians, Cimmerians, from Omri, the king Omri. It's a form of the word Omri, Qumri. Josephus is our only first century witness I can think of. He does talk about in the Antiquities, but he just calls them the 10 tribes. He said they're innumerable and they dwell up around the Black Sea. So he's kind of putting them up to the north, but he doesn't give them a name. But some of the Assyrian inscriptions seem to refer to them as Omri or Qumri or Qumri, and then later we know that as the Sumerians. But I'm not an expert on that sort of thing.
Thank you
They're
for
called
that.
Samaritans. If they're still in the country, they get called Samaritans, which is interesting. They're from Tyre. They're actually from Tyre. So.
Gray's 174, was Jesus being sinless a contemporary belief?
Contemporary to whom, I guess we'd have to ask.
Why was he getting baptized if he didn't have sins?
Yeah, that comes up in the Gospels. Sounds like he, one of the main Psalms that is messianic, the guy is definitely the Davidic Messiah. Trying to think if it's 43 or 42, can't remember now. But it's the one where he says, my sins are more than the hairs of my head. And he is the guy. It's quoted in the New Testament.
So Gray's just said mid-vision, contemporary to Jesus and the disciples. So,
okay.
So specifically that.
The earliest, I think not. No. First of all, everybody's a human and everybody's a sinner in that sense. There's, Paul says, I'm blameless according to the law. And that means he's not catting around and getting drunk and sleeping with women and cussing and stealing and lying and cheating like most of us did growing up, right? So, not me. I was a good boy.
Mm-hmm.
But, remember, sinners is used in a religious sense, almost like we would use unchurched or something like that. Like, he doesn't even go to church in a little town in the South. I grew up in some of these little Texas towns. Not grew up, but I'm exposed to it from my family. And like, it was more of that idea, but not like you're faultless and you've never done anything wrong in your whole life. But, somebody who takes God seriously and takes the faith seriously and so forth. But the earliest witness, I think, is Paul in 2 Corinthians. He who knew no sin was made to be sin for us, that kind of substitutionary atonement idea. I think that's the earliest reference, because the gospel stuff is later, and it's not clear in all of the gospels. Like when he's declared to be innocent, say in Luke, before Pontius Pilate, that's not talking about him having a moral perfection, right? He's innocent, meaning he doesn't deserve to die. Like we'd say a person's innocent. Doesn't mean they're perfect. So I think it's clearly a theological category that develops with Paul and beyond, that you need this perfect sacrifice without blemish, without any sin.
Nice.
And he certainly doesn't seem to claim that. Can I tell you one joke though? In the Hebrew gospel, when he objects, Neil, to being baptized, he says, well, this is for remission of sins. And I don't think I have any sins, unless what I said was just the sin of ignorance. You get it? It's a joke.
Hold on, say it again.
Is I just said I didn't have any sins, and maybe I do, and therefore I did sin because I was ignorant.
The sin of ignorance. Oh man,
I love that.
Gray's 174 again. Do you have an anti-supernatural bias?
No, if anything, I'm accused of the other, being naively accepting things more than
I get both. I get called both, and that's how I know I'm doing something right, because both sides of the
spectrum. Also, I would trash supernatural just the way I would trash physical, spiritual.
Yeah.
What does it even mean? If you can tell me what natural is, and then there's something beyond that, I would say redefine the natural, because it's pretty super, right? Now, that doesn't mean they're things that seem ridiculous. Like if I told you that an elephant flew from London to New York last night, made it in 6 hours, and he's in Times Square, but now he's poofed away. But millions of people saw it, and it did happen. We have eyewitnesses. I would say I have an anti-supernatural bias to say,
Right, me too.
That's bullshit. That did not
Yep.
happen. I heard Pat Robertson. Remember Pat Robertson? He's still living, but he would read these prayer things over the air, but he wouldn't read them before. So they, oh, we got another one here. Sent $25. Oh, Susan out in Virginia Beach. She had her teeth pulled and was going to get dentures on Wednesday, and the Lord put a whole new set of teeth in her mouth instantly and put a gold cross on each one.
Oh.
He goes, but he read it before he realized how stupid it was. And he goes, well, praise the Lord for that, brother. Thank you for the donation. Now, he did not believe that happened. I'm sorry.
Oh,
stupid things don't happen. You see what I'm saying?
Oh, I'm with you 100%.
Oh, yeah, I have an I just object to the language. I know exactly what grace means. But look, bodies don't rise. Corpses don't come back to life once they begin to decay. They go back to the dust. And everybody has a human father. Oh, that's a supernatural bias then. You just denied the resurrection and the virgin birth. No, that's not a supernatural bias. It's a reality bias. Things like that don't happen.
Yeah,
but
I'm with you.
Other things more wondrous than that happen every day. Like me talking to you right now. And my brain is this gel of plasm, and I have a self-consciousness. That's pretty supernatural. So we define supernatural. It's very.
I love how you did that. I love
my
that.
computer ain't talking now. It's just doing what I tell it. Yeah. But I'm talking.
Shekhar, thank you for the super chat. Says, where was Jesus during his younger years? India?
Jesus.
I think he was working in Sepphoris, laying stones, cutting stones. He refers all the time to laying foundations, building, and he's right there, tecton. Yeah. I don't think he's in India or Egypt.
Maybe Egypt, but not India.
Yeah, these are just legendary stories you make of all holy men. Even Alexander goes to the Indus River and talks to the gymnast sophists, the Indian Hindus. Yeah.
Thank you for that super chat. Super chat. Thank you for becoming a member, Jacquez. I appreciate it. I hope I said your name correctly. I really appreciate you.
Jacques Zurgens.
Jacquez?
No, Jacques. Like Pharaoh Jacques?
Yeah.
Huh.
That's French.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And then Discovering Ancient History with Pat Lowinger. Pat, I hope you're doing all right, brother. Thank you for that. It would have been easier to track Jesus with GPS.
Nice. Oh, we do that. Because if we're going to find a road or a tomb or a trail, we use the GPS and then we get down to the track.
That's true.
But that's true. We use all these methods. We do every site I've dug at. We have used GPS. Yeah. I'm going to lose my voice, and you got to go to your party.
Yeah, go subscribe to Dr. Tabor's YouTube channel. Subscribe to Neil's YouTube channel. He's got some stuff coming up, as you see. Big names. We're doing scholarship here.
You guys are amazing. All this stuff. I'm just blown away myself.
And I'm dropping Matthew Monger right now after this video. So be on the lookout for that one.
Yeah, go to that as soon as it's done. And then, of course, go to Dr. Tabor. Well, in the description, the link will take you to the Blossoming Rose, page. But
it's just blossomingrose.org if you forget it. Or go to my homepage, Derek. Just click home up there real quick. Here's the way to get it. Click home. Now go down. See that tracking Jesus? What do we know? How do we know it? There it is right there. And if you hit that, you got the itinerary, the pricing, everything right there.
Here, I'll put it right now in the chat for our audience.
Yeah, James Taylor, tracking Jesus.
I just
Yeah, I
released
hope
my-
we get some people. And if anybody signs up, put a little note that you signed up because of Derek's program and Neil's program, and I'll give them $1 each. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Now, you know,
Wow.
I'll take that $1.
They'll
You know-
take it. They will take it. They will take
I
it.
will take that $1. That
Yeah.
$1's a blessing there.
You could get
Hallelujah.
it could become 100-fold or 1,000-fold if you
Right,
sow
right.
it in the right ministry.
That's it. Hallelujah. Dr. Tabor, love you and thank you for your time. Neil, thank you for joining me today. And then, of course, the queen of Myth Vision for taking her time. And
you know what we didn't mention? We had so much fun, didn't we?
Oh, that's why I wanted to
We
bring
had
it
so
into
much
that.
fun.
See,
I mean,
Ryan
things
would
just
have been
happen in
more.
a group. We're like
I
laughing.
think my wife would have
and
been more active, James, if we would have took it into like, let's just talk about the fun too, because she doesn't care about all of this that we've been talking about this whole time. I mean, she might find
Do
a
you
thing
know
or two.
this song by the? Do you know this song by the Who called "The Seekers"?
Yes.
Okay, they call me the Seeker. Okay, Lori said on this tour she's taken over from Ross. You know, Ross helped me.
Yeah.
She's blasting the Seeker as we pull out of the airport, and she's going to dance in the aisle, and she's going to go, "We're the Seekers. We're the." You guys go play it on, you know, Spotify or Apple Music.
Right.
If you're
And
too
just
young
imagine
to know,
Lori.
blast it over the house and become a seeker. It's so cool. It fits exactly the Holy Land tour. So that's my wife. She's very cool. And we got to get all the wives together here on another tour in the future. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. And let them go shopping a little longer. It was too much. We were doing so much fun
Lori,
stuff.
Lori, remember, she had that congestion from the flight. So she had to lay low a little bit. Okay. Thank you so much, guys. Enjoy.
Thank you.
I thought we were only going to go an hour, but it sounds like people were really interested. So
yeah, we had a lot of people interested. I thank you again. And never forget, ladies and gentlemen, we are Myth Vision. Have a nice day.